Morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Aurum Stay-at-Home series. We're bringing you exciting guests, and we have another one today that I'm pretty excited about. So, Dr. Andrew Johnson, if you'd like to give a wave to everybody watching. For those of you that don't know Dr. Andrew Johnson, he completed his general dental in 2010, his prosthodontic training in 2013 at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center in Memphis, and he is now operating a multi-specialty private practice in Rogers, Arkansas. Along with his specialist certificate, Dr. Johnson earned a postdoctoral master's degree in dental science, researching CAD/CAM, restorative techniques, and emerging digital dental materials. So thank you so much for being on with us today, and I really look forward to the webinar next week. Is there anything that you would want to add to that, Dr. Johnson?
Oh, glorious stuff about myself? Sure, about an hour's worth, but that's what we'll do in the webinar.
Perfect. I will mention too that you do some consulting for us, and it's pretty awesome consulting. So I have a few questions for you just so that our viewers that join us next week are going to know what to expect from your webinar. So first question is, what are going to be the main takeaways from your topic, and really who should be watching?
Well, I would say that people that should be watching are anybody that are either standing at the edge of the digital denture pool or those that have jumped in and been swimming in the shallow end. I think I even maybe, that'll be getting too optimistic, have something to offer those that have been doing digital dentures for quite some time, maybe even from the beginning 10, 12, 15 years ago. I would say that I hope that the main takeaways could be at least familiarization with a lot of the processes or the evolution of those processes, comparing and contrasting the laboratory steps that have evolved over time, as well as the clinical steps that have kind of evolved in concert with a lot of those updated laboratory processes. You know, we've gone from old school packing of acrylic in brass flasks to injection molding and microwaving and pour basing, and now we've got milling and printing that are just, you know, natural next steps in the how do you make these things story, but how it's influencing the clinical end, what we do stepwise with our hands directly in patients' mouths. That's where I think the more interesting part of the story is, and that's what I hope people take away the most. It doesn't just mean that digital technology is simply continuing to substitute for all the conventional steps we all learned in school. It's not just that it's a digital impression versus a physical impression. It's not like that anymore. It's not a one-to-one trade-off. I want people to be able to recognize, accept, and understand the solutions to the denture problem. We first have to admit that there's a problem, and has been for a long, long time. It's related to our limitations throughout the history of the materials and the processes. But now that we are not subject to many of those limitations, we need to recognize what a better, brighter future actually looks like and how to achieve it. One of the things I go back to is, you know, once you realize where we are in this spectrum of technologies, we need to decide, are we upside down, inside out, or backwards? And that goes through the whole economics and the digital process conversation, from, you know, how much revenue do we really recoup from these processes? What kind of results are we delivering? And how do we connect patients with their best solution?
Hey, that's awesome. And I should probably make mention that the title of your webinar is going to be Disrupting Dentures. It's a patient flow for the future. So in your opinion, what are the biggest changes the last 5 to 10 years in the denture industry, and the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I would say the last 5 to 10 year change that has made the biggest impact is just how are we producing these things? Obviously, the first digital denture that hit the market was a milled solution and has been the quote gold standard of the modern era of denture production for, you know, a decade plus. With the milling fabrication process comes naturally a little bit of CAD software and expertise, and that software has evolved, the expertise has evolved, and once we have turned computer-aided design in the denture space into the mainstream, which I would think it's on the verge of that now, we can then start evolving the materials and start fine-tuning that computer-aided design mindset I think that the next 5 to 10 years are going to yield all kinds of breakthroughs in printed materials. And we're not just going to be stuck with resins. We're going to be hybridizing those resins as we are currently doing. Zirconia will be printed. It's been possible to print zirconia for a long time now, and we're just playing an IP battle and an FDA battle and all these bureaucratic battles that come with who invented what and for what purpose. So once all those red tape barriers start to drop and we start to see materials that are undeniably better structurally, aesthetically, and longevity-wise, that we'll see that additive manufacturing completely supplants subtractive manufacturing. But in the middle, I would say that we're already in the middle. We're already blending these two workflows now, and that's the present day scenario. We're blending prefabricated milled structures with directly fabricated, locally produced printed structures on occasion. And, you know, it's just a blend of materials, you know, who can make what, where, how, and for how much.
All right. So, and with all the on-site scanning and software and production equipment, will we still need labs in the future? How important will the labs be in the future?
Well, this is the million-dollar question, right? Maybe the billion-dollar question. Absolutely, we will need labs. Yeah, I agree. As somebody that's, you know, at least conversationally familiar with the laboratory side of this dentistry game, we absolutely need to lean on that industry infrastructure. If we start thinking that we're going to localize everything about dentistry because the printers are so cheap and the materials are so cheap and it's something that anybody can do, you know, it's the same reason that not every single dentist on the planet has a CEREC unit. No knock on CEREC, but it does take time. It does take effort. It does take experience and expertise to have a local machine do what an entire industry has grown up for the last century doing off-site. Now, that being said, I think that it is very, very important to highlight that, you know, we have to lean on these labs not just as the producers of the things, not just the physical object manufacturers, even though we need to start categorizing them as manufacturing centers more than typical dental laboratories, because it is becoming the industry standard to produce things per ISO standards and all those sorts of things. But we need to lean on those laboratory resources that are pushing hard on education, not just because we're on a webinar intro right now, but because for the labs to sell what they sell, they have to sell it to educated consumers, just like we need to do patient education to get people sold on their best interest treatment-wise. It works in the same way from the laboratory to the doctor conversation. So once the doctors can become educated enough to select the right thing, not just the cheapest thing all the time, it then becomes mutually efficient for the laboratories to work with those doctor clients on sensible workflows that are efficient and effective. And it's still an industry of people, in my opinion. No matter what machine does what, however fast, it still takes a person to input the data. It still takes a clinician to provide that patient information. It still takes a technician on the back end to make sure that the machine is operating correctly. And these people on the back end are much more qualified to babysit these million-dollar machines, whether they're milling machines or printers. There's a lot that goes into it engineering-wise to make sure that the product that comes out of it is per the design that everybody has agreed on. So it still is going to be people that drive the technology, not the other way around.
You mentioned something really important too, is it's not just a dentist specific thing, that you typically get what you pay for, right? The cheapest is not always the best. So we see that time and time again. Final question for you. What's the first thing you'd recommend for dentists to do if they want to start going digital, truly digital?
That's a very good question, because I think that there are a lot of people that have yet to really take a bite of this sector of the industry. And the very first thing that I would recommend, it's not go out and buy a milling machine. It's not even these days buy a CT scanner, even though I think that's hugely essential. I think that there are some services that you can lean on and some specialists in communities that can provide that imaging resource for you. But what is most locally beneficial to any practice out there is the use of an intraoral scanner. And I say that, and I don't just mean for intraoral scanning. I mean that my intraoral scanner these days has basically replaced almost everything I used to use a box scanner on my lab bench for. So I'm digitizing most of my models in my hand. I'm digitizing most of my impressions right there, chairside in my hand.
Yep.
And that's just a means of extracting information and digitizing that information right there immediately. So most of the impressions I take immediately come out of the mouth, they immediately get scanned, and then they get thrown in a case pan and probably never seen again, because now the data lives in that computer. And what is most important about that is if you have a proclivity for tinkering within dentistry, the intraoral scanner is going to be your best or maybe worst habit you pick up, because it will have you begin to think in that digital manner. It will have you thinking like the computers are thinking. And the more you can think like the computers, the more you are thinking like your technician. And if your technician ever tried to train you on any of the processes that he's required to go to or she's required to go to in the background, then you guys can speak the same language of processes and technology. So the last comment I will make to that point is it's what you could say ABCD. It is always be coaching and delegating, because if you're the only one around that can do these sorts of things, you're going to get busier and busier, and your weekends are going to go away, and there's going to be no definition between when you clock in and when you clock out of your job, which most of us have just accepted that as the new reality. But if you can coach on this, if you can train this, if you can delegate this, this now becomes, instead of an assistant taking an alginate to the lab to pour up and provide a base and trim and then put it in the case pan, this is now show me when the model is printed. You know, this is digitally base it. This is digitally scan that impression. This is turn it into a physical object and run it through the printer and then show me that when you're done.
Yeah, well, I can speak from the lab side. It's so much easier to work with, digital files and printed models. When you have alginate bites come in, it's definitely, there's more opportunity for impurities, I suppose you could say, in the work. So again, next week, Thursday, April the 14th, 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're going to be talking with Dr. Andrew Johnson on disrupting dentures, patient flow for the future. This is the continuation of our Aurum stay-at-home series. I am Jason Zelmer. I'm the National Director of Sales and Practice Growth with the Aurum Group, and my guest here is Dr. Andrew Johnson. So, Dr. Drew, we look forward to seeing you next week, and thank you so much for this today.
Thank you, Jason. Looking forward to talking with everybody. Thank you very much.
We'll talk to you next week.
Okay, have a great one.